Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Q&A, part of a series to accompany the Creative Essentials book, The Art of Screen Adaptation, Top Writers Reveal Their Craft. I'm Alistair Owen, I'm the author of the book, and I'm delighted to be joined by another of those writers and former Writers Guild President, Olivia Hetreed. Olivia, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So in the book, we focused on Olivia's adaptations of Girl with a Pearl Earring and Wuthering Heights. So today we're going to talk about a different kind of adaptation, rewriting other people's scripts, and also the process of collaborating with directors to translate their vision to the page. As Nadine says, we're going to talk for about 30 minutes, then we'll open it up to questions from you guys. Do feel free to pop those in the chat box as we're going. I'll be monitoring those as well as doing the interview and consulting my notes here. So if at any point my gaze is wandering, it isn't because I've lost interest in what Olivia is saying. So Olivia, you've described rewriting as one of the darker arts, yet most screenwriters do it at one time or another. Does the existence of previous scripts carry any weight in your decision to accept a project? And do you ever talk to the previous writer on a project before embarking on your draft?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it might be worth talking about rewriting. And by this, I mean, when one writer takes over another writer's work, not the rewriting that all of us do when we're endlessly rewriting ourselves to try and fix our own problems and make things better. And obviously that kind of rewriting is the daily bread and butter and nose to the grindstone of life. But I think rewriting when you're rewriting other people's work is sort of not really talked about, because there's, along with the fiction that directors think of the whole thing out of their heads and just turn up on the shoot and you know, it all flows naturally between them and the actors. There's also a kind of, you know, desire to believe that if not that, then at least the writer is, you know, a single voice, let's say, if not a single person, and that the ideal version of a film only has one writer, and that the kind of, you know, the most egregious commercial written by committee kind of film would have, you know, 3 sets of writers on it, because that's the most that you're allowed to show, but probably 15 sets of writers if you actually looked at how many people had a hack at it over the course of its existence. So it's not something that I think people talk about, because it's not considered very high status. But as you say, lots of people do it, lots of very fine writers do it, lots of people do it and do it very well. So I think it's worth talking about the how of it, as well as the, you know, why, and just kind of making it a more public arena. So I hope that there'll be lots of kind of conversation and questions about it. And in the course of this answer, I've completely forgotten what the question is that you asked in the first place.
Well, that's fine. I'll come back to my original question in a sec, because actually you're quite right. I think there is a slight reluctance to talk about it. I remember going to the BFI BAFTA screenwriters lecture with Brian Helgeland, the co-screenwriter of LA Confidential, and I asked a question from the audience about him rewriting The Bourne Supremacy, which was originally written by Tony Gilroy. And I got the impression he was almost slightly offended that I'd asked. He wasn't credited on the final script, but did quite a deal of work on it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to me something one should be embarrassed by. It's perfectly possible to do fantastic work on a script, even if you're uncredited. So the questions I have was, does the existence of previous scripts carry any weight in your decision whether or not to accept a project?
Right. Yes, well, for a long time, I thought it was a reason not to accept a project, that I didn't, you know, I sort of on principle didn't want to do rewriting, that I didn't think that that was a good use of my time, that I felt particularly kind of when I was very publicly representing the Writers Guild, that it might be something that felt like it was hostile in some way to other writers. And probably I was a little bit stuck up about it too, I think. I think sometimes I just thought I was, not that kind of a writer, darling. And I think I've really reconsidered that, because I think it's an incredibly useful learning experience. It's very humbling, because you read other people's work and you go, oh, they're so good at doing this, which I'm not very good at, but maybe I'm good at doing this other thing that they're not so good at. And how great that I can fix these bits and they fix those bits, and together we can make something that, is better than either of us could have made on our own. So I guess when I'm looking at potentially rewriting something, that's what I'm looking for. There's no point me rewriting something from a writer who is good at the same things as me. What I'm looking for is a writer who is good at different things from me, so that I can help their script to be better, and that the combination of us will be better than the original. So that's what I'm looking for.
Of course, it's important, I think, to draw a distinction between the two different kinds of rewrites. What you're talking about there is a rewrite where you will have read the previous draft or drafts, which may not be by one writer, they may be by multiple, but you'll have whoever the most recent writer on the project was, as opposed to what's known as a page one rewrite, where you're literally starting from scratch. It's not unheard of for screenwriters not even to read the previous drafts.
Yes, I've had a project like that where, I did read a previous draft, but I felt it was going completely in the wrong direction. And so I was asked originally to do, a standard could you come and fix this script? And I pitched that it was, simply, well, we shouldn't have started from here and we shouldn't go in that direction. This is what I would like to do. This is where I would take the story. This is how it would go. And so in that case, there was a previous script, but it really had very little bearing on what I did. There was some source material, both a true story and a novel. So there was plenty of existing material, which would mean that we were treading the same ground. But the approach that I took was so completely different that I think, this is something we might come to later, I think there's very little that you could find of, exact comparisons between the two scripts.
When you're taking on a script where you're rewriting the other writer, you've read the scripts, you're not looking to throw it out, you're looking to enhance, change. The way that you're dealing with that writer's screenplay, it's not dissimilar, in fact, in a sense, to taking a novel. The novelist or non-fiction writer will have provided you with certain things, and you're coming in to provide certain other things in order to reshape it into a coherent whole. Is that sort of fair?
Yeah. I think it is fair. It's, except for that with a novel, often so much of the work you're doing in adaptation is really rethinking the material to work for the screen. So you have a great story, you have fantastic characters, you have, the situation that everyone thinks is going to make a great film. But then your job is, in that rewriting, is to really dismantle that as much as you require, and then come afresh and say, okay, as a film, this story is going to look like this, and it might start in a different place and it might go in a different direction, and all the scenes might happen in a different order and so on. There will be clearly a relationship between the source material and the screenplay, but it might be quite a distant one. I think with rewriting with an existing script, the other thing that's really important is, what is the brief?
I was going to ask about that, because sometimes the brief might be characters, it might be dialogue, it might be, there's a whole range of reasons why and things you might be asked to do.
Yeah, so somebody has come to me saying, I want to rewrite this, I want this script rewritten, and this is what we want to achieve. And I have to say that that brief is much more useful than these are the things that are wrong with this one. I can probably read it and find out the things that are wrong with this one, but what is it you want to achieve is really the big question. And sometimes you realize that the reason that the poor other writer hasn't achieved it is because the person giving you the brief doesn't know what they want to achieve. And that's a really good reason not to do that rewrite. But if they have, you know, yes, this is what we want to achieve, and I agree with them that at the moment the script they have isn't achieving that, and I think yes, it could do that in a really interesting way if we did this, that, and the other. Then I will always pitch back what I think I'm going to do, because again, I don't think there's any point coming in to do a rewrite and kind of, you know, it's not a kind of let me go off into my secret creative place and come back with something that astonishes you sort of a job. It's this is what needs to be achieved. This is the way I think it can be achieved. Is that the kind of thing you're thinking of? Right, then I can do that. And that, you know, that kind of clarity about it makes it very straightforward. When it gets a bit uncomfortable is when, for one reason or another, we haven't achieved that clarity. And so I rewrite something, and then, for instance, someone starts backpedaling and going, oh yes, but it used to be like this, and it used to be like this. Yes, but you know, you didn't like that and it didn't work. So why would we go back there? So I think finding the clarity in the brief is hugely important to this kind of a process.
As it is with an adaptation, in fact, to know that you are heading in the same direction with what you want to do with the book would, I imagine, save an awful lot of time and heartache further down the track if you find yourself on radically different pages. Yeah, absolutely. No, it's the rule one of working with other people is making sure you're working towards the same end. So simple and so incredibly hard to get right, unfortunately. When you've done rewrites, have you ever worked with the previous screenwriter, or has it always been a case where you've taken over and done your bit, and then maybe that's the final draft, or maybe then someone else takes over from you?
Yeah, so I've just done a film called Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, which is coming out next spring. And I had known about this project from its inception, because the director is an old friend of mine, Tony Fabian. So we had discussed it way back when, and then he and an American writer, Carol Cartwright, wrote the first version of it, and it's kind of wonderfully spread over 3 continents, so that we'll be able to cover all the possible press. If anybody ever wants to talk to a writer, then we're available. So then Keith Thompson, who is Australian, and another excellent writer, came on, and he wrote a version of it which moved certain elements of it on in a really good way, but it still wasn't quite there. And so then Tony came back to me and said, I think it's time that you did your pass now, Olivia. You know? And so I did. So I was very much on that project. I wasn't trying to do anything apart from do my bit, make this better, kind of work with the existing material in every way to make it as good as possible, which I have to say is something I would always do. I don't believe in the hostile rewrite, you know, the kind of, how can I get rid of the other writer's work and grab myself all the credit? I think that's just childish, but that's probably why I'm poor and other people are rich. The great thing with this was that I think we all had respect for each other's writing, and it was a case where there was a really clear place in the script. I was the only woman writing on the script, and the script is about a middle-aged woman, and that was kind of what was missing. She was a character going through a series of events, but she didn't really have quite a sense of inner life and motivation that she needed for us to care enough for the whole story to work. So it was a really clear brief, both from Tony, the director, and from the producers. And it was something that was a very kind of positive experience for all of us, I think. I mean, I have spoken to the other writers, and they've certainly been very, very charming and friendly. And I think it was great for us all, because it does feel like everyone brought something, and we didn't kind of step on each other's feet. We all allowed each other to be, do the thing we were good at, and then I got to come on, and there was still space for me to contribute something meaningful. So that was an incredibly positive experience.
It sounds like pretty much the perfect rewrite experience.
Yeah, I think it was. And I think it was great because there was that clarity all the way, and there was a sense of knowing what needed doing, not trying to fix anything that didn't need doing. And actually, it also, we'll come on to working with directors, but one of the things that often drives us writers mad about directors is that they believe that they wrote it. And I have to say, in the course of this experience, I got much more sympathetic to that, because when I went back through the script to work out what I had contributed and what the other writers had contributed, there were whole sections that I could swear I had written, but that it turned out that they had written much, it was like, oh, that's embarrassing. I hadn't claimed credit for them, but I certainly would have done if you'd, just asked me point blank. But yes, of course I wrote that scene. And I was like, no, it's very clear that somebody else wrote that scene before you, and you just fixed a couple of bits of dialogue in it. So that was quite a salutary lesson. And I completely understand why, if you're junketing your way around the world and people keep asking you about how you had the inspiration for that scene, you might end up going, it came out of my head and I imagined it all, when in fact it came out of the writer's head. So there you go, directors, there's a free pass for you.
You have, of course, had at least one somewhat different experience in terms of rewriting, and that was the case of Wuthering Heights, where you did the first few drafts. Andrea Arnold then came on and did some work on it before she directed it. You got both a co-screenplay and a screen story by credit there, which is, having read both your script, obviously, and the novel, is a reasonable reflection of the fact that the way you chose to shape the narrative pretty much survives intact through to the finished film. What was that, having nursed it through several drafts, what was that experience like? And do you think that experience of being rewritten has any impact on the way you might then subsequently approach other writers' screenplays if you're the one doing the rewriting?
Yeah, I mean, it was the first time I had been rewritten, and it did come rather out of the blue, that I didn't think that was the process we were in, and then it just happened. So it was quite disconcerting, I think, first of all, because I thought that I was engaged in a collaborative process, and then I found that I wasn't. And then I just felt terribly frustrated, because I thought, I still think that collaboration is just a much better process. And I could have helped her to make the script better. I could have helped her to make the film better. And I wasn't allowed to. So it was very frustrating to me not to be able to do that. But I think, some people find collaboration terribly difficult, terribly threatening, or just awkward. You know, how do I work with this other person? And I think Andrea genuinely tried and didn't know how to do it. So it wasn't that she just high-handedly took it away. She made, you know, a significant effort to do it, but it wasn't a thing that she could do naturally.
Well, that takes us on very nicely to working with directors, in fact, which was the second thing that we were going to talk about today. Again, it's not something that's talked about very much. Those gigs where you come on quite late and you're sort of helping the director, or indeed at any point in the process, and you're helping the director translate their vision into something that works in script terms. Again, there's almost an element of adaptation there. Actually, you're adapting someone's thoughts and ideas into something that works. Could you talk us through that process and your experience of that process?
Yeah, so I've done several films, almost entirely with non-English first language directors, and sometimes with films that are not English language, or didn't start off as English language but turn into English language films. And when I'm coming on like that, when you're brought on as the writer to help the director, or when the director has approached me to write with them, I mean, I think I love doing that, I have to say. And then I'm, again, it's a kind of clear brief. My brief is really clearly to help this director express themselves. You know, they're a great director and they know how to direct the actors and they know how to make a beautiful scene and so on, but maybe they're not necessarily great writers. So is there a way that I can help them get on the page so that everybody else understands it, the ideas, the pictures, the story that they have in their head, and so that everybody else can get on board with the film? And that seems to me a really interesting and enjoyable way to collaborate with something. I feel that I then get the kind of opportunity to sort of rummage around in a director's head a bit and go, oh, look at all this incredible, interesting stuff, and look at the way you think about story. And with these directors too, also a completely different cultural experience of going, you know, looking at the whole world in a slightly different way. And finding the things that are the same and finding the things that really feel different, and how to express them, how to translate them, how to understand them. So it's, yeah, I find that an incredibly rich and interesting experience. I think in the end, probably that you end up with a script that is never as much in the foreground, and I think that's quite nice too, that they feel like films without much writing, if you like. And I hope that that's true. I wouldn't want to come and kind of impose too much script on a director who doesn't kind of think that way.
But presumably there must sometimes be moments where you're being asked to do something, or the director is suggesting something, and you, with your experience of script writing, know that that's not going to work. How do you approach that when you've been brought on to sort of help the director achieve what they wanted to achieve? What's that?
Yeah. So I did a film called which is now called Finding Altamira, which I always think is a bit too Finding Nemo, but still, which is about the extraordinary cave paintings in Altamira and how they were discovered. And this started as a documentary, a Spanish documentary, with a wonderful Spanish director called José Luis López Linares. And he directs documentaries, and he shoots films. He's got a wonderful eye, and he's a all-round wonderful human being, but he really hates conflict. And in the script he had written, he had therefore carefully avoided all conflict between the characters. And I said to him, Jose Luis, you do understand that the basis of drama is conflict, and they're going to have to be much more conflicted than they currently are. And he was very, very sad and disappointed by this. And every time I wrote, conflict into the script, he would kind of tug at it gently and go, perhaps not quite so much, and pull it back. And, oh, but why do they have to be, upset with each other? And why is there a misunderstanding here? And why has this all gone wrong? So that was very difficult, in a completely charming way, but very difficult. And in the end, Jose Luis ended up not directing the film. Not I think because of his dislike of conflict, but because it was becoming clear that it had to be an English language film, and he really didn't feel comfortable to do that. But I think it was very difficult for him. And when I watched his documentaries, they would frequently reach a point where you went, there's going to be a conflict. And then they would very politely skirt around them and come back, 3 days later when everyone was happy again. And that would have been problematic in the film.
You came from an editing background, and indeed you've also directed a couple of short films, I think. Do you have ambitions to direct a feature? It's something that writers sometimes want to end up doing for the control as much as anything else.
Sorry, there's cat feeding going on in the background, so excuse the wailing noises in the background. I directed a short film just before everything went mad, and I really loved the experience, and I would love to do it again. And I have a project that I would love to direct, that I feel like I completely understand. But it hasn't, I think it's only made me feel more respectful of good directing, I mean, just that feeling of, I can see Susie Farrell there, working with someone like Julian Gerald and just going, this guy knows what he's doing and he's really telling the story so beautifully. And it's such a pleasure to hand something over to someone, doing the right thing and adding, just as I feel like I can add something to that other script, a good director adds something. So I'm very enthusiastic about that, the good collaboration.
But there must have been plenty of moments in your writing career where you've spent a lot of time with a script, possibly with the book based on beforehand. You must get to the end from time to time and be slightly trepidatious about handing it over, because you must feel like you know how to do this almost better than anybody else.
Yes, but I mean, you can't direct to proof a script. I think I have tried, and it doesn't really work. They're going to do what they do. So I try to be as helpful and useful and collaborative and positive as possible. And clearly that doesn't always work in terms of managing to kind of maintain a partnership. But I guess the other thing to do is you get a little bit better, maybe. I always think I get better and then I make a bad decision. You get better at choosing the people you work with. I feel like the directors I'm working with at the moment are people whose vision I admire and whose ability to collaborate seems very good. So I guess that's what I'm looking for in the director. Is it's really important to think that they're going to do a good job. So if I think I could do a better job, I shouldn't I shouldn't have started working with them, because I know I'm not, I'm a very inexperienced director, so it's unlikely that I'm going to do the best possible job in the world, except for with that one script where I feel so passionately that I am the person to tell this story, that I know best about it. But that's a very rare bird for me.
Are you able to say what that is, or is it confidential?
No, I don't think it's confidential. It's an adaptation of a wonderful Kate Summerscale real life story called Mrs. Robinson's Disgrace, which is about one of the very first divorce cases in Britain.
Yes, I've read it. A very vivid piece of Victoriana, that actually.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's a wonderful. She's any of us, but caught in the nightmare of being a Victorian woman.
Don't be shy about putting questions into the chat. Happy to throw them at Olivia. I've got one here, quite an interesting one, from it's Stephen actually. Hello, Stephen. Stephen Volk. Why do high-profile rewriters like Tom Stoppard happily hack into other people's original scripts while reserving their own original work for other media? Is it because they think film offers a writer less authorship? That's quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Tom Stoppard has gone on the record a few times that he has a very clear kind of hierarchy, that for him, a good idea of his own is a thing he wants to be on in the theatre. And that, he would never put a good idea through the kind of mill of trying to make it into a film. And he has done lots of rewriting. And I think he's pretty clear that he does it for money, So the answer to why would he hack into someone else's work is because Harvey Weinstein used to pay him a ton of money for it. I
mean, I think it's important to draw a distinction with Tom Stoppard, who I've tried to get for 2 separate books in the course of my career and failed, I'm afraid, both times, although I do have a nice polite rejection on Tom Stoppard headed note card. His adaptations are something that he cares more about, I think, than the rewrites. There's a lovely story, if you'll forgive me. I remember reading it somewhere. He did the original draft of adapted J.G. Ballard's Empire of the Sun for Spielberg, and then I believe that at a certain point, Spielberg brought in another writer, the writer of Color, the adapter of Color Purple, and Tom Stoppard apparently wrote Steven Spielberg a very long memo saying why the new draft was a mistake and why Spielberg should revert to using his original draft, and that is exactly what Steven Spielberg did. The passion, I think, that it would take a screenwriter to do that and achieve the desired result. I've always been incredibly impressed with that, because often when a writer has been replaced, there's no coming back from that. It's quite unusual to go back to earlier drafts.
Yep. No, I agree. No, I'm not suggesting that he doesn't take seriously the writing of anything for the screen. He certainly does. And actually, I read his original version of what's it called, The Golden Compass, which was fantastic, but incredibly dark. And you can kind of see why they balked at it and went in another direction. But it didn't do them any good, did it?
True. Another good question here from Heather McQuaid. What is the difference between a rewrite and a script doctoring gig, if indeed there is a difference?
I guess a rewrite is you are in the position of a writer. Sorry about the cat again. That you are in the position of a writer, and therefore, that's the mindset you bring to it, is how as a writer am I changing scenes and fixing things and so on. I don't think I do any script doctoring. I certainly don't do anything officially, but I would say that's you're trying not to be a writer, then you're trying to fix things and suggest things and mend and heal but not really be a creative force. But I probably don't know the answer because I'm not a script doctor and I don't do that.
Oh, you've never, that kind of work has never appealed to you?
I do lots of mentoring, so that might be script doctoring, but I wouldn't call it that, I guess. Yeah, nobody's ever paid me to be a script doctor.
So question from Amy.
Pakistanis. No, she's a Bengal, which might be equally perverse, let's say.
Oh, this is interesting. Do you create your own beat sheet when rewriting a work? How do you map out the current script in order to remap it? That's quite an interesting question. I use beat sheets when I'm writing screenplays, which are no more complicated than, I got this from Schrader on Schrader, actually. He outlines his script on a single sheet of A4. Each scene is literally like a strap, almost like the description you might see on the DVD chapter headings. And I've got that all on one page, and you can rearrange it. Beat sheets, you know, every writer has their own version of it. But how do you set about that? You've got a script of somewhere between 90 and 120 pages. You're setting out to rewrite it and remap it. What's the actual physical process?
That's such a good question. So with Mrs. Harris, I knew that there were sections that needed work, and then so it was rather like that bit when they you know go in to do a gory hospital operation, and you put green stuff all around, and you just isolate the area, and then I would go into the isolated area and kind of do the work in that section, so then I always kind of revert to kind of outline, treatment, form. So everything is written down as 2 or 3 lines per scene, just to make sure that it all works. And then I would have kind of the outline scene on either end of, you know, what I was coming in from and what I was going out to, and then kind of rewrite through those scenes without having to take them out and do treatment on them. But obviously you have to make little changes because you've changed what's coming before and what's coming after and so on. So that was very kind of going in to individual bits, pulling them out, writing the treatment, was something like the Jack London script, where I was starting again. Then I went absolutely back to the beginning and wrote. I mean, my process tends to be to write a kind of 2-3 page outline, and then a 12-page treatment, which is like the short story version of the script. And I never learned to do those. I see other people's brilliant sort of slug line ones and so on, but I didn't learn to do that early enough, perhaps, so I still haven't got around to doing that.
So when you're rewriting someone else's script, would you just go in and do your bits surgically, rather than, you wouldn't necessarily run the entire script through your own laptop and turn it into your own prose, or would you?
No, I would, but I certainly wouldn't rewrite a scene that was working perfectly well. I think that is the very cynical version of screenwriting, of rewriting, and I've read rewrites where someone has clearly done that. They've just gone into every scene, rewritten it in different words, changed the character's name, fiddled around with a bit of dialogue, but the scene is essentially exactly the same scene, doing exactly the same job. And the fact that you've changed, you know, Ethel into Fred doesn't make a blind bit of difference to it. It's still the same scene. And that's really cynical, you know.
There's I'm sure plenty of people here will understand the reason, one of the reasons for doing that, but in case you don't, I'm imagining that is because in order to get a screen credit, particularly through Writers Guild of America rules, you have to have changed the preceding script by a certain percentage in order to be considered for one of those on-screen credits. That's right,
exactly,
I think.
Exactly, yeah. So you can see, you know, WGA writers just doing that, and every new writer who comes on has, you know, changed all the characters' names and reset all the scenes in the bar into scenes in a hotel, you know, like, yeah, all right, guys. So yeah, that's I think that's the kind of rewriting that gives rewriting a bad name. What's great is that you know, when you're reading through the history of a script, and then you suddenly come to the rewrite where someone goes, but the real problem with this is that we just don't care about our protagonist until halfway through Act 2. And if instead we did this at the front, then the whole thing would shift. And they may not have changed the whole of Act 2, but they did something so radical at the beginning of Act 1 that the entire script is different. You know, and to me, that's kind of a brilliant piece of rewriting. And that's why the old percentages thing can be a bit nonsensical, because one brilliant intervention in a script can be worth much, much more. One great idea about character motivation can just unlock everything else in the story, and you don't have to change it. It just makes it work much better.
A question from Jean Buchanan. How does one get into script rewriting? I mean, in a sense, the answer is you've got to get into script writing first, and then the rewrites come your way. It's a bit of a catch-22, I think. I think
that's true. The other way, obviously, is the kind of script doctoring, script editing route. So you could do it by being a development person in a company, and, you know, being so good at the helpful suggestions that you end up rewriting things, which will probably make you pretty unpopular with the writer that you whose job you usurp in the first place, but might be a way for you to get into rewriting. But yes, I think it's one of those perverse things, like the way that they always give lots of fancy things to movie stars. Like, who are the people who least need to be given free stuff? Let's give them all the free stuff. And it's a bit like that with rewriting jobs. Let's find the busiest writers we can who've got the most stuff going on and try and get them to rewrite our scripts. This is why they want Tom Stoppard to rewrite their script, partly. It's because, you know, it's a big shiny badge on your lapel, isn't it? You know.
I've always been, this is a slight digression, but I've always been rather interested in the process by which producers end up picking particular writers. I mean, clearly, I did a book of interviews with Christopher Hampton, and unsurprisingly, after he won the Oscar for Dangerous Liaisons, he was inundated with work. I imagine the same has happened again with The Father. But taking out something like that, or someone's just had a big hit, I'm always fascinated by that process by which a producer, of all the available writers who might be out there, how they zero in on one in particular. Do you have any thoughts on that process? Because it's slightly opaque.
It is opaque, isn't it? Yes, and it all goes on in a very kind of behind closed doors way. And I used to get asked often those questions about, you know, as a female writer, do you get sent different material? And as a female writer, do you choose to work on particular projects and so on? And people are a bit more careful about asking the questions now, which is cool. But really the answer was, I don't know, because I get sent what I get sent. And yes, it does seem to have, you know, a surprisingly large number of female protagonists turn up in the projects that people send me. So I imagine that they think, because there's a woman in the lead role, they should find a female writer to write it. And you know, one hopes now that there's more sense of that kind of diverse thinking, that you might try and find appropriate writers for particular projects. But you also have to be careful that you don't just go, oh, I will only send, you know, to Black writers this very particular kind of Black project, and I will, you know, so I won't consider them for anything else. Or I will only send female writers projects with a female protagonist, because how could they write anything else? That would be a really frustrating kind of boxing into different boxes. And for all that I think things are a little better now. There is still an overwhelming preponderance of straight white stories, and not just from producers, but more particularly from audiences who probably take longer to kind of catch up with this than the people who want to commission them, or the people who want to commission them are more afraid of what the audience might not take to. So it's really difficult. I think the thing is that there's always a kind of iceberg effect to screenwriting too. So there's the material, the films that you see, and there are people responding to that. And then there are the films that win awards and things, and people responding to that. But then there's a whole undersea world of all these scripts that are out there that are being sent out by agents as samples, and that are being read by producers with a view to possibly making and so on, that make them think, well, I don't want this script, but I like this writing. So that they may then, you end up having a conversation because they don't want to make the film that you want to make, but they want to make some other film and they liked the way you wrote that one. So yeah, it's very hard to know how any particular thing comes apart from those occasional moments of extreme heat that sometimes you're lucky enough to experience.
Question here from Alice. What methods do you use to imagine and enter into a historical period, adapting or writing stories from the past?
Lots of research, which I love. So yes, trying to kind of find the everyday life of the period, so that I know what you ate and where you washed your hands, and who did the shopping in the house. I was just interviewing somebody about living in Gaza in 1987, and I said, where did you go shopping? Was there any kind of a supermarket? Did you go to the market or whatever? And she looked mildly offended and said, darling, I didn't go shopping. There were people who did that. And I realized it was only so far I was going to get in this interview with what ordinary life was like for people. But on the other hand, she was very good on, what the artists were doing during the first Intifada. So that was very useful. So yeah, lots of research. If it's possible to do, if it's reasonably contemporary and you can speak to people, that's fantastic. If you can find a friendly expert, then buy them a meal and get them to tell you, because mostly, especially if they're doing something quite obscure, then having a conversation with someone who is genuinely thrilled to hear about their specialist subject, and with the potential that one day it might be film or television, is an almost irresistible offer. So people are incredibly generous in sharing their expertise. And the internet is wonderful from that regard, that you can both find people, but you can obviously find enormous amounts of information too.
I was just thinking that the other day. I started writing something over the weekend, and what did we all do before the internet? I looked up sort of 10 things in about 15 minutes, and I wouldn't have been able to progress with the scenes if I hadn't.
I spent so much time in the British Library and the London Library, with stacks and stacks of books, and then there'd be kind of one thing in one book and one thing in another book and one thing in another book. So you'd have so many different books, and then you'd have to work out, did you have to write it? You had to write it out all in pencil because you weren't allowed to take anything into the library. Yeah, it was not a great system. But on the other hand, I think writing it out in pencil stuck it in my head in a way that copy and pasting doesn't. So I sometimes still find that writing, I do an awful lot of just writing stuff down in my notebooks all the time. Not so much because I need to read it back, but because writing it in there somehow embeds it in me better.
Got a very interesting question here from Susie Farrell. Curious to hear from Olivia, what are the darkest moments in your writing process, and where does the joy lie? Good questions there. Shall we start with the darkest moments?
Darkest moments. The darkest moments are that at some point on every single project, I am in despair and it's not going to work. And I don't know why I'm here. And yeah, it's never going to come right. And that can go on for, for a very short time, which is marvelous, or for really a painfully long time. And the fact that I have been through that dark time so many times now makes me have any hope that in the end I will find a way out of it. Because honestly, it's not like I'm going, oh, it's terrible, and then I have a brilliant idea and it's all fixed. It's terrible, and then I kind of stumble around for sufficiently long in the dark that I accidentally kick a hole in the wall and there's a bit of light, and that's the way I get out. But I don't feel like yeah, I've found a good way out of the extreme dark place.
And the joy?
And the joy is the joy, yes. The joy is those days when the scene works, you have a great idea, you wake up having gone to bed thinking about the unfixable problem, and you have a great idea and the great idea works, and then the whole day is just a kind of skipping through primroses of writing kind of a day. Those are really joyful. And then then the other joy, of course, is when you get some actors and they say the lines and run the scene, and you're like, oh, this is so much better than me in my room with my squeaky voice trying to make this work.
Quite often, of course, that moment when the actors come on board is the moment when you realize that some of your carefully crafted dialogue is actually no longer needed.
Yeah, which is great too. I'm always a fan of it's not needed. And it's another reason why I think the writer should be there, because on the one hand, they might do something nasty to it. But it's great to be able to go, no, of course you don't need to say that line. If it's obvious from the way your hand hits his as you leave the room that you're pissed off with him, don't say the line, because why would you? But also, and I see this quite often in scenes, you see a moment where a character, because of the geography of the room or something, they're kind of still in the room, but they don't have anything to say. And you can see an actor start to kind of slightly do mime, because they're like, oh, I feel really awkward. And I'm still in the room, and I, in normal life, I'd be saying something, but nobody's written me a line here. So then again, if you've got the writer around, they can go, would it help if she just said, I'm going to peel some potatoes now, so that she can get out of the room? So I think being flexible with the actors is great. When we did Girl with the Pearl Earring, and Colin, who's the only actor who's ever done this to me, Colin first came on and said, could I say less? I was like, hallelujah, yes, you can. It was wonderful.
Final question from me, which I've asked all the interviewees so far, I think, during this series, or most of them, which is quite simply, how have you found it writing during lockdown?
Well,
right, during the COVID period, let's say.
Gone on
to be in a lockdown hiatus, but who knows?
So lockdown 1 was like heaven, because suddenly I didn't have to go to meetings anymore. I could just Zoom with people and nobody bothered me, and I just wrote and wrote and wrote, and it was marvelous. Then lockdown 2, I think, I was getting completely behind, because I got so excited about how well everything was going. I'd taken on much too much work. So by the time it got through lockdown 2, I was running to to stand still, trying to catch up with myself all the time. And now it just feels like this is life, doesn't it? I don't think this doesn't feel any different. But, you know, being a writer is probably the best place to be, isn't it? Because here we are, we're all used to working at home. We didn't have an expensive office full of people that we have to worry about furloughing or keeping on, or, you know, not paying the rent on or anything else. I can't think of a better job to have had than to be a writer in the last couple of years. Yeah, it's made me even more grateful to be allowed to do this job.
Well, I think that's a lovely note to end on. Thank you very much. So if you found any of this interesting tonight, I hope you have. Olivia is one of 12 fantastic writers in the Art of Screen Adaptation here. You can get this at the moment 25% off if you order on the Creative Essentials website and tap in the code CE25. There's a link to that on my website. There's a link to it on my Twitter bio, which is at Alistair Writer. There's also the previous Q&As that I've done with the Writers Guild, and also before I partnered with the Guild, are all on the Guild's YouTube channel, and again also accessible via the media page of my website. So I'd like to say thanks very much to all of you for coming. I go there were some sound issues, so I hope that they sorted themselves out, or at least Olivia's answers were interesting enough to compensate for the volume of my questions. And thanks also, of course, to Nadine and the Guild for hosting. This is our last one of the year, and what a fantastic year of, 12 months of more of Zoom Q&As. So thank you to her, and of course the biggest thank you of all to Olivia for taking the time to talk to us today. Thank you very much.